Hi, welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. The wait is over for Battlefield 2042 beta, and we've jumped into it to test a range of graphics cards at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K to find out if your PC is ready for Battlefield 2042, and if it's not, make some recommendations on gaming pre-builds, laptops, and custom builds so that you can jump into the action. Of course, that's what we do here at this channel. We get you the best price to performance on your PC. If that's the kind of content you want to support, please give the video a like as it really helps out. And of course, subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when we release new content. So we jumped into the Battlefield 2042 beta to get a first-hand experience with the DICE/Electronic Arts hotly anticipated title. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably already know that the beta went live on October 6th and will go through the 10th. And you can participate if you pre-order the game, and I'll include an affiliate link down in the description if you want to buy the game and of course support the channel for free at the same time. What is currently available on the beta is the new Conquest mode, which is Battlefield's massive sandbox mode supporting 128 players on Xbox Series X, S, PlayStation 5, and PC. The maps have been specifically designed for the vast scale, with action divided into clusters of various kinds. The action now centers around sectors consisting of several flags instead of individual control points. The only map currently available is the Orbital map, which is a mix of island, suburban, and large-scale urban combat zones. Future modes not available on the beta, but planned for the November 19th release include the Breakthrough, Portal, and Hazard Zone modes. If you pre-order, you do get the game 10 days early on November 9th. I do want to be clear that while I had a lot of fun playing the game for benchmarking purposes, this is not a review of Battlefield 2042 itself, and instead, we're going to focus on what it takes to run the game at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. I also want to caution that this is a beta, and it's likely that performance will improve in the final release, but it is possible it could go in the other direction as well. The minimum specs for the beta, again, just the beta, are a Ryzen 3600 or an i5-6600K with 8GB of memory and a GTX 1050 Ti, or Radeon RX 560 with 4GB of VRAM and of course 100GB of storage space. The recommended specs, and this is a little confusing, is a Ryzen 2700X or i7-4790, 16GB of memory, and an RTX 3060 or RX 6600 XT, at least 8GB of VRAM, and 100GB of SSD storage space. Let me tell you right off, they are serious about the VRAM if you want to run this game in higher ultra settings, at least on the beta. In fact, let's talk about the VRAM. Even with my RTX 3060 Ti, a GPU that currently costs about $825 in this market, forget the fairy tale MSRPs, the game would absolutely crash at 4K ultra settings due to what appeared to be not enough VRAM. But it just could also be a bug. Similarly, as we'll see, I couldn't even test the GTX 1660 Super with its 6GB of VRAM at 4K high settings because of what appeared to be the same VRAM size issue. So at least for the beta, VRAM size appears to be very important. Now before we jump into the benchmarks, let's talk about the quality setting differences between Ultra and High. I had a really hard time picking out any differences in the ultra settings versus the high settings. Here's a side-by-side comparison of them at 1080p so you can take a look yourself. Now while the visuals in a game like Battlefield 2042 are nice to see, most players I know would quickly trade a little bit of detail for higher frame rates. And that is exactly what you see when you drop down from ultra to high settings at 1080p. We go from an average FPS of 88 in ultra to 100 FPS in high, or a 14% increase to average frame rates. But it's the massive increase in the 1% lows from 45 to 67 FPS, a whopping 49% increase, that's the real story here. I do expect performance to improve as we move from beta to release, but I think most players will want to go for either high or medium settings and skip ultra altogether. Sadly, the Battlefield 2042 beta is very aggressive about limiting the number of PCs that use a specific license, which limited my testing as each time I switched out the GPU, it considered my PC a new machine, forcing me to buy several game licenses to complete my testing. But I was able to benchmark a good range of GPUs, including the GTX 1660 Super, the Radeon RX 6600 XT, and the RTX 3060 Ti. I had hoped to benchmark an older generation Radeon R7 370, but the game would not allow me to load as AMD stopped supporting the card, and it is exactly one driver edition too old for Battlefield 2042. We'll see if that requirement carries over to the release or if it's just for beta testing. All testing was conducted on a Ryzen 5600X with 32 gigabytes of DDR4, 3200 CL16 on an Asus ROG Strix B550F with the Cooler Master Master Liquid ML240 Illusion 240mm all-in-one liquid cooler using the latest version of Windows 10 and GPU drivers. Note that I did disable the in-game features for dynamic resolution scale and future frame rendering. Starting at 4K, the RTX 3060 Ti puts in a serviceable 55 FPS, while the RX 6600 XT trails by 27% at 40 FPS. The 1660 Super's 6GB of VRAM simply wasn't enough at the high settings, though I don't imagine it would be a good experience even if it ran. The experience on the RX 6600 XT and RTX 3060 Ti was playable, and turning down the settings to medium or low did substantially boost FPS, but as we'll see, it's just a better idea to go 1440p or 1080p if you want higher frame rates. If you want to play this game at 4K, I think an RTX 3080 with its 10GB of VRAM or a Radeon RX 6800 XT with 16GB of VRAM might be the cutoff for a good experience, especially at ultra settings. At 1440p, the RTX 3060 Ti gives us 87 average FPS, and was a very good overall experience. Trailing it by 17% is the Radeon RX 6600 XT at 72 FPS. The GTX 1660 Super was surprisingly playable as well at 53 FPS. Again, my experience is that performance will increase at least a little bit by the time the release, with further optimization. And of course, you can drop down to medium or low settings for an FPS boost, or just knock over to 1080p. Over to 1080p, and this is where I think a lot of players are going to settle in. Here the RTX 3060 Ti gives us 100 FPS average, and the RX 6600 XT really shines at 96 FPS, or only 4% behind the much more expensive NVIDIA GPU. Remember, that's comparing real market prices and not fairy tale MSRPs. The 1660 Super itself puts in a very playable 69 FPS, and remember, this is at high details. We can of course turn down the details. So how does Battlefield 2042 compare to a game like Call of Duty Warzone in terms of FPS at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K? I jumped into Warzone Season 6 to retest the RTX 3060 Ti and found a pretty massive gap in frame rates at all three resolutions. At 1080p, playing in the Battle Royale mode in high settings, I got an average of 144 FPS in Warzone, 44% higher than Battlefield 2042. Similarly, in 1440p, I got an average of 129 FPS in Warzone versus 87 in Battlefield 2042, a huge 48% increase. At 4K, the margin narrows to 23% more FPS in Warzone than Battlefield 2042. Overall, if you're looking to make a comparison, Battlefield 2042 is a much more hardware demanding game than Warzone. Even though at this stage, I have to say that Warzone simply looks better a lot of the time. Though I hope that with some additional optimizations between now and the full release, we see that the gap lessens while image fidelity in Battlefield 2042 increases. So if you want to get into Battlefield 2042 at launch, but you don't have the hardware yet, what are your options at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K for a gaming laptop, for gaming pre-builds, or to build your own? Let's go over some options. Links to everything is going to be down in the video description, and of course, I'll include some alternates as well. Alright, starting at 1080p gaming PCs, I definitely at least target a 1660 Super with 6GB of VRAM. As VRAM, it just seems to be a premium in Battlefield 2042. So I definitely get 16GB of system memory as well. I'd look at something like this, like an ABS Gladiator pre-built with an i5 10400F, a GeForce GTX 1660 Super. This is about $1,000 right now. Alternatively, you could look at something more like the Skytech Kronos. This is an AMD Ryzen 3600, GTX 1660 Super, 16 gigabytes of memory. I wish the speed was a little higher, but 3000 is probably fine for you. For laptops at 1080p, I would be looking at something like the Lenovo Legion Y540. This has a 9th gen Intel i7 processor in it with a GTX 1660 Ti. That's the laptop version of the 1660 Super, essentially. You can think of it that way, but it has 6 gigabytes of VRAM, which is really important. This one right here has a 512 gigabyte SSD and a 1 terabyte hard drive for $1,200. I will say though that the cheaper RTX 3060 laptops, and they have lower graphics power, as a result, they'll have less performance, but they are about the same price now as some of the GTX 1660 Ti laptops. They both have 6 gigabytes of VRAM. The 3060, even at the lower TGP, is going to outperform the 1660. So I would recommend taking a look at something like the MSI GF65 and other lower end 3060 laptops as well. Of course, a really great laptop deal right now, if you want to play 1080p high settings, is the Dell G15 Ryzen edition. It's got RTX 3060, a Ryzen 7 5800H, 16 gigabytes of memory. Will only set you back about $1,300, in this case $1,331 as I have it spec'd out here. Again, links will be down in the description for this, but it goes blow for blow with the Lenovo Legion 5 RTX 3060 edition. It has one of the higher TGP 3060 version. So this is just another one to look at. If you want to build your own system, you can actually do that right now, but you're going to need to grab one of these RX 6600 XT combos over at Newegg. You can grab a 6600 XT with a motherboard. In Canada, I think they're also offering power supplies and cases as well. But if you're lucky enough and grab the B450 one, which is actually the cheapest one here for $620, and you want to do a build, then I can put together one right now, at least in PC Part Picker, for $960. There hasn't been a cheaper time to get into 1080p, high-end 1080p slash, at least lower tier 1440p gaming in the last year, right? Exactly. So with the graphics card shortage, this uses a Ryzen 5 1600 AF. I'd like to use a faster processor. You certainly could go with a 5600X here. I'm just trying to do a super budget system since it is a B450 and you're not going to get PCIe 3. Why not save a whole bundle of money? Memory is cheap right now. 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 CL16 is only $50. Through a 512 gig SSD in it, an NVMe M.2 drive, and of course, a relatively budget case with 3 fans and an appropriate power supply. Alternatively, if you grab any of the B550 combos, which are much more numerous, by the way, so you'll see a lot of these. This here with the ASRock Steel Legend. This is with the Asus TUF Gaming motherboard. They also have some Intel combos now with a Z570 motherboards. So let's just quickly look at 2 combos there. Here's an AMD Ryzen 5 5600X gaming build. I put this together for $1,231. Now this is using slightly better parts, the 5600X obviously. We have an aftermarket cooler here for $25. We've got the Steel Legend. I went with the same cheap kit of memory. If you want to get a nicer looking kit, by all means spend $10-20 more. Again, Crucial P2 500 gigabyte SSD. Same case, different power supply here. This one's actually on the B tier of the Linus Tech Tips PSU Cultist list, so it's a pretty good power supply. And then, of course, if you want to go Intel instead, you just happen to pick up that Z590 motherboard, I put together one here with an i5-11600K. Now, these CPUs require more cooling, so I just went ahead and went with the Scythe Fuma 2. It's only $60. Phenomenal cooler. They actually don't have the motherboard in PC Part Picker, so I just put in the next MSI motherboard I could find and change the price for it. We could definitely go with a cheaper kit of memory here. I went with a Corsair Vengeance on this one just for some variety, I guess. This is $78. The other ones were about $50. You could save $20 there. And again, a similar setup, but this one comes with the Sapphire Pulse. Again, they don't have that in PC Part Picker yet, so I just ad-libbed here. Generally, much better cooler design for Sapphire there than maybe the ASRock, although in my testing, I tested with the ASRock Challenger and it was just fine and temps were absolutely stable. If you're looking to play Battlefield 2042, I would recommend getting at least an RTX 3060. One thing you know with the 3060, you're not going to run out of VRAM because it actually comes with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, unlike the 3060 Ti and 3070, which only come with 8 gigabytes. So here's an i5 10400F for only $1,200 with an RTX 3060. I'd recommend this one. I'm not a huge fan of the actual cooler itself, but if you want, buy an aftermarket cooler for $25, spend 15 minutes and change that out. However, I think that cooler is probably adequate for the 10400F. The thing I like about ABS and some of their pre-builts is they're always going to tell you which what some of the components are. So in this case, they're going to tell you you're at least getting an Intel B560 motherboard. That's important because B460 motherboards don't allow memory overclocking where B560 do, so you can run the memory faster than 2666. And in this case, they're going to give you 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3000 speed. Pretty good. For only $1,350, it's essentially the same PC, except this one has a 3060 Ti. This is maybe where I would go if you want like really solid frame rates at 1440p. And then of course, if you want something that's really gonna smoke it at 1440p, here's an i5 10600K with an RTX 3070 Ti for $1,900. This comes with an aftermarket cooler already installed right there. You can see it. Overall, pretty good values. On the Amazon side, if you're looking at something, if you don't like ABS for some reason, you could take a look at the CyberPower PC. This is a Ryzen 5 5600X. It only comes included with the stock cooler. Again, you can switch that out for $25 if you want to just order one with it. 16 gigs of RAM. Or if you're looking for a 3060 Ti and a 5600X combo, here you go, the Skytech Shiva for $1,700. And again, stock cooler, you can swap that out if you want. I think the stock cooler is probably fine for the 5600X. Might just be a little noisy for you. On the laptop side, let's take a look. The big challenge with 1440p capable laptops is they're mostly sold out. This includes like the Lenovo Legion 5 Pro. Given that they're sold out, what do? Well, you could hook up an external monitor to something like the Legion 5 Gen 6, which has an RTX 3060 in it. This one here for $1,740, 5800H processor in it. That's an 8-core 16-thread processor with an RTX 3070 8GB, 16 gigabytes of system memory, and a 1 terabyte SSD. That's a pretty good option. Again, you're going to have to get an external monitor for this. However, right now, the HP Omen 15Z is in stock, which has very similar specs to what I just named, except it has a QHD, 1440p, 165 hertz IPS panel on it. And that's for $1,850 right now. Over on the custom build side, I'd stick with the 6600 XT kind of as a baseline. Right now, the hardest thing to get is a graphics card, right? So if you're able to get a 3060 Ti, a 3070, an RX 6700 XT instead, then I would stick with the same build. I would just pop up the power supply just a little bit to an adequate level, swap in the motherboard since you're not getting a motherboard combo that you want. Check out my best motherboards for Ryzen 5000 for this. I think the CPU cooler is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with the memory or SSD. Just slide in your graphics card and I think you're good to go. But of course, the pricing for those cards, as we all know, is significantly higher. Finally, on the 4K side, it's pretty easy. There's not really any laptops worth mentioning for 4K unless you're going to hook up an external monitor, and then you're going to want something with an RTX 3080 16 gigabyte version, which are super expensive. I would strongly recommend just getting a gaming desktop instead at that point. Here you go, ABS Gladiator. This is an i7 10700KF. This is going to give you really high performance RTX 3080 with a 240 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler. Pretty much this is going to be an amazing gaming rig for $2,600. I do love, again, the thing, not to talk Newegg up too much, but they promised ASUS Prime Z490P. That's a very good Z490 motherboard. There's a lot of bad Z490 motherboards, and I like that they specify the one that they're using because that way you know you're getting a good one. Alternatively, if you want to go something like all AMD or you want to get something that's not Newegg, the Skytech Siege. This is a Ryzen 7 5800X with a RX 6900 XT. This will probably outperform the previous one, but if you want NVIDIA, definitely get the RTX 3080 one that I just showed you. Or if you want to move up and you want Ryzen with NVIDIA, then of course you could get something like the Skytech Prism 2, Ryzen 7 5800X, RTX 3080 Ti. Now we're talking some very serious levels of performance for $3,500. And if you just have to have the absolute best of the best of the best, well, here you go. Over at Newegg, the ABS Legend, it's a Ryzen 9 5950X GeForce RTX 3080 Ti.
I wish the memory was a little faster here, but they do give you 32 gigabytes of it, and you're going to get a Gen 4 SSD with a 240 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler, which is the Aorus, I believe, Water Force version, which is a really nice one. And the motherboard is going to be the Asus TUF X570 Gaming Plus, which is a very, very good motherboard for $3,800. So for a custom build at 4K, I mean, look, if you can get a 3080 Ti, a 3080, or a 3090 graphics card, great. They're not in stock, obviously, at least not in the US. So I'm going to go ahead and go with the RX 6900 XT because it is in stock at Newegg for about $1,600 right now. It's pretty good deal, LOL, right? Yeah, only this year is that a pretty good deal. Hopefully it's not a good deal next year. We're going to go with a Ryzen 5900X for $560, cooling it with an Arctic Liquid Freezer 2 360 ARGB model, which I'm so glad that they introduced the ARGB models on those. Then we're going to go with the B550 Gaming Carbon Wi-Fi. The price on that board has come way down to sub $200. At that price, it's actually probably one of the best price to performance B550s now, especially since it has a front panel USB Type-C on it. Then of course I went 4x8 gigabytes of Trident Zenio, 32 gigs total at 3600 CL16. We went with the ADATA XPG SX8200 Pro, 1 terabyte. No reason to go Gen 4 just for gaming. And then Phanteks Eclipse P500A. That's one of the cases I used in my recent build. And rounding it out, a very good 850 watt power supply. Total on this build is going to be about $3,100 before tax. If you got value out of this look at Battlefield 2042 beta benchmarks, remember to give the video a like as it makes a huge difference to the channel. And tell me down in the comments, what do you think about the game? What do you think about whether or not your PC is ready for Battlefield 2042? Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll catch you on the next one.